I've been working as a freelance land surveyor for about 15 years now. Most of my jobs are solo, way out in remote areas where you won't see another person for days. Honestly, I've always preferred it that way, or at least I used to. This happened about 4 years ago, and it's still the scariest experience I've ever had. I'd been hired to survey boundary markers on a parcel of land up in the mountains near the Clearwater region in Idaho. When I say remote, I mean seriously remote. It took me about 6 miles of hiking just to reach the spot where I set up camp. Like always, I filed my route with the local ranger station, packed about a week's worth of supplies, and headed in. The first day went exactly how you'd hope. I located 3 markers, logged everything properly, and made it back to camp before dark. The forecast had called for cold weather with light snow, and that's pretty much what I got. Nothing out of the ordinary. But by the second day, things started to shift. We got way more snow than expected. It was coming down heavier, and the ground was already getting tricky. The next marker I needed to find was only about a mile out of the way, so instead of calling it early and staying put, I figured, what the hell, I can handle it. That was a mistake. I still think about how stupid that decision was. I should have stayed put. I should have played it safe, but I didn't. The terrain was brutal. Hidden rocks, uneven ground, and icy slopes all buried under fresh snow. Basically the worst possible conditions to be hiking through. Every step had to be careful. I was making my way down a short embankment when it happened. My boot hit a patch of ice I never even saw, and just like that, I was gone. I slipped and slid probably about 15 feet before I managed to stop myself by grabbing onto a tree root. I was lucky, really lucky, not to have gone further, but the second I stopped, I felt it. A sharp, immediate pain shooting through my right ankle. I tried to convince myself I was fine. You know how it is, you don't want to admit you're hurt out there. But the moment I stood up, I couldn't help it. I groaned out loud. I couldn't put real weight on that leg. I knew right away something wasn't right. At best, I figured it would take a few hours before I could even walk somewhat normally again. I was furious at myself, but there was nothing I could do. I called it right there. No boundary marker was worth getting stranded or worse. I turned around and slowly, painfully made my way back uphill toward the main trail, heading for camp. After a few minutes of walking, I noticed something. Boot prints. They were on the trail ahead of me, coming from deeper in the woods off to my left, and they looked fresh. Even with the snow falling, the edges were still sharp and defined. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe it was a hunter or someone working with the landowner's crew. It's not unheard of to run into people, even in remote areas. So I just kept moving, trying to keep the pressure off my ankle. But as the light started fading, I began to notice something else. Sounds. At first, I brushed it off as normal forest noise. Wind, shifting branches, maybe animals moving around. But the more I listened, the more it started to sound like footsteps behind me. I kept turning around, scanning the trees, but I couldn't see anything. That part of the forest was dense. If something or someone was out there, they could easily stay hidden. I stopped walking, and the sound stopped too. Not instantly, there was a slight delay, maybe a second or two, but then it went completely quiet. I just stood there, frozen, listening as hard as I could. Nothing but wind and falling snow. So I started walking again. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. No footsteps, no sounds. Then they came back. That same rhythm, that same presence behind me. I kept looking back, but there was nothing there. That's when it really started to get to me. Not just fear, but frustration too. Because I knew if something was out there, I couldn't run. I couldn't chase it off. I couldn't even properly defend myself if it came down to it. I just had to keep moving. Then I heard something else. A metallic sound. It came from somewhere off to my left, low, dull, like metal lightly hitting metal, almost like someone tapping on a fence post or a piece of equipment, which made no sense. There wasn't supposed to be anything like that out there, just trees, snow, wilderness. That sound threw me off so much that I suddenly realized I hadn't been paying attention to those footprints anymore. I looked down. They were gone. I turned around quickly, trying to figure out where they had gone, if they had turned off, doubled back, anything, but I couldn't see a clear trail. Then I looked to my left, and that's when my stomach dropped. There was another set of footprints coming out from the tree line, running parallel to mine, not far away at all. Whoever had been ahead of me before was now walking alongside me, just inside the trees. At that point, I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I should have stayed quiet. I should have just kept moving. But instead, I called out. I asked if anyone was there. No answer. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, waiting, hoping for some kind of response. Nothing came. That's when I knew I needed to get out of there, fast. But my ankle, it just wouldn't let me. I wanted to run, even just a slow jog would have helped, but I couldn't manage it. So I just kept pushing forward, telling myself I was close to camp. I wasn't hearing footsteps anymore, which should have been reassuring, but it wasn't, because I knew someone was out there, and that didn't make sense. Not out there. I was getting close to my campsite when I heard it, a loud, heavy crack, a branch snapping somewhere behind me. Not a natural fall, not the wind. Something broke it. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept moving, focusing on one thing, getting back to camp. And eventually, I made it. By then, it was fully dark. I got inside my tent, zipped it up, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't any safer in there than I had been out on the trail. That realization pushed me into action. I started packing immediately. My ankle made it painfully slow, but I did everything I could to hurry. Most of my fear, honestly, probably more than half of it, came from knowing that if something happened, I wouldn't be able to run or fight properly. Then I heard it. The one thing I'd been dreading the entire time. Footsteps, right outside my tent. I froze. They weren't rushing toward me. They were moving around the tent, slowly circling it. I just sat there, listening, my mind racing through every possible outcome, waiting for the moment the zipper would rip open. The circling went on for what felt like 5 straight minutes. Then, silence. I didn't hear whoever or whatever it was walk away, but I didn't care anymore. I was leaving. I finished packing, took a deep breath, and slowly unzipped the tent. The second I stepped outside and looked toward the trees, I screamed. There was a man standing there, right at the edge of the tree line, staring directly at me. He looked wrong. Old, frail, sickly, like he was barely holding himself together. There was something about him that just felt off, like he didn't belong out there. I just stared at him, completely frozen. I expected him to rush me at any second, but he didn't move. So I slowly raised my hands and said, "I don't want any trouble." He didn't respond. We just stood there, staring at each other for what felt like forever. Then finally, he spoke, and what he said still sticks with me to this day. He looked at me and said, "You're a lucky man." Then he turned and disappeared into the woods, just like that. The rest of that night is kind of a blur. Between the pain in my ankle and everything that had just happened, my head wasn't right. But I packed up the rest of my gear and left immediately. I didn't care that it was dark. I didn't care how dangerous it was. I just needed to get out of there. Later, when I got checked out, they told me I had a severely sprained ankle. They even said it was a miracle I hadn't done worse damage by walking on it. I reported the man I saw out there, but I already knew nothing would come of it. I didn't take another winter contract for almost a year after that. I still do remote work. It's my livelihood, and I'm good at it, but I don't camp alone on winter jobs anymore. Not after that. Now, I either bring someone with me or I turn the job down completely, because no matter how experienced you are out there, sometimes you're not alone, and sometimes you're just lucky to make it back. I've lived in Alaska for most of my life. My family moved to Fairbanks when I was 6, and I never really left after that. Growing up, I spent my summers working at fish camps, and by my early 20s, I was guiding professionally. That's basically been my life ever since. I'm 29 now, and I work seasonally as a wilderness guide in northern Alaska. I've been doing it long enough that not much out there really shakes me anymore. I don't get turned around, I don't get lost, or at least I didn't think I could. What happened 3 years ago forced me to seriously reconsider that. At the time, my boyfriend was Randy. He grew up in rural British Columbia, and when it came to the outdoors, he was basically the male version of me. Honestly, that's probably not even fair to him. He was more experienced than I was in certain areas, especially winter navigation. We'd been together for about 4 years, and most of our relationship revolved around trips that would make normal couples absolutely miserable. Week-long hunts, backcountry camping trips where you actually have to plan things out carefully, or you die. That might sound dramatic, but up there, it's just the truth. The plan for this trip was simple. We were going to snowmobile between 2 state-registered cabins that were about 60 miles apart. We'd spend 1 night at each, then head back home. 4 days total. We had already done that exact route twice before, and both times had gone perfectly fine. The weather forecast looked good when we left, so there was nothing to worry about. The first day was completely uneventful. We reached the second cabin by late afternoon, made some freeze-dried meals that Randy insisted tasted great, but honestly they were terrible, and then we sat around playing cards. It was quiet, relaxing. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up and immediately realized something was wrong. There was a full-on storm raging outside, not just light snow. This was a full blizzard that seemed to come out of nowhere. It was shocking, especially since the forecast hadn't mentioned any kind of precipitation at all. Even so, Randy and I made the decision to push forward. We had plenty of food. We could have easily waited it out another day. We should have waited. I know that now. Things went bad fast. The wind was almost worse than the snow itself. Visibility was terrible. You could barely see anything ahead. Because of that, Randy took the lead. I followed behind him, tracking the path of his snowmobile. Honestly, it made things easier for me. Navigating blind like that without anything to follow would have been much harder. And because of that, I don't blame him for what happened next. I still don't fully understand how it happened. 1 second, he was moving steadily ahead, and the next, his snowmobile had flipped and was on top of him. I jumped off mine immediately and ran over, but it was already bad. His leg, it was bent in a way that legs are not supposed to bend. And you have to understand, this was a guy who once finished a 2-day trek on a sprained ankle and didn't even mention it until we were back at the truck. That's the kind of pain tolerance he had. The first thing I tried was getting him onto my snowmobile. It was the obvious solution, get him on the back and ride us both to the cabin. But Randy was 6'2", probably around 220 pounds at the time. And these machines aren't like ATVs where you can just throw someone on and go. An Arctic cat in deep snow is already difficult to handle by yourself. I managed to get him up once, half dragging him onto the seat behind me, but he lasted maybe 10 seconds before he slipped off. The sound he made when he hit the ground, that's something I never want to hear again. I tried one more time. It was even worse. He couldn't grip with his legs at all. every slight shift of the machine made him start to slide, and there was no way I could hold him and steer at the same time. After that second attempt, he told me to stop, and the way he said it, it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. That's when we both silently accepted what the plan had to be. I pulled out the satellite phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. After a few tries, I actually got a connection, but I wasn't confident my message went through clearly. I gave our coordinates and tried to explain the situation, but relying on someone else to reach us in those conditions, it felt like a gamble, a dangerous one. We both knew it. I knew what I had to do. I would leave him there, as sheltered as possible, with all the extra supplies, and I would take my snowmobile and push for the nearest cabin to use the emergency radio. There wasn't much discussion. We just looked at each other, and that was it. I'd bundled him up with every extra layer we had, marked our location carefully on my GPS, and got ready to leave. He told me to be careful. Then he told me not to do anything stupid. And then I left him there, alone, injured, in the middle of a blizzard. I navigated mostly by instinct and GPS, but I won't lie, the situation was getting to me. I was trying not to panic, but it was hard not to think about what could happen to him if I didn't make it in time. After about 45 minutes, something started to feel off. The terrain didn't look right. Landmarks weren't lining up the way they should have. At first, I blamed the storm. Snow can completely distort your sense of direction. But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. Then I saw it. Smoke. Faint, drifting through the trees to my left. I immediately turned toward it, thinking maybe, somehow, I had looped back to one of the cabins. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't either of them. The structure was different, smaller, honestly, kind of ugly. One side of it was almost buried under a massive snowdrift. There was a dim glow coming from inside, and smoke was rising steadily from the chimney. At that point, I didn't question it. Smoke meant a person. A person meant help, a radio, warmth. I shut off my snowmobile and trudged through the snow toward the door. I knocked a few times, expecting someone to answer. No one did. So I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I stepped inside and was immediately hit with warmth. The place was definitely being lived in. There was a wood stove burning in the corner, a bedroll laid out on the floor, and a can of food sitting nearby with a spoon still in it. It looked like whoever lived there had just stepped out moments ago. I called out, announcing myself. No answer. So I stood there for a minute, warming my hands, trying the satellite phone again. Nothing. Still no signal. It was frustrating, but I couldn't stay there long. Randy was out there, waiting, depending on me. As I turned to leave, something on a shelf along the back wall caught my eye. A pair of binoculars. Next to them, a folded map and a notebook. I walked over and unfolded the map. It was a trail map of the exact area we'd been riding through. Sections of it were circled in marker, and I recognized some of them. 2 specifically. Both of the cabins we had stayed at were marked, and next to them were dates written in pencil, some from that winter, some from the year before, and even earlier. A bad feeling started building in my chest. I picked up the notebook. Whoever owned it had been documenting people. There were descriptions, what they were wearing, which direction they were heading, details about their movements. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. There was a very real chance that Randy and I were somewhere in those pages, and I had no intention of sticking around to find out. It's hard to explain what shifted in my head at that moment. It wasn't immediate fear. It was something else. Like everything in that cabin suddenly rearranged itself in my mind. What had felt like a safe place just seconds earlier now felt completely wrong. Dangerous. I put everything back down and headed straight for the door, but just as I reached for the handle, I heard it. The loudest, most horrifying scream I have ever heard in my life. It came from below me, from under the floor. It was a woman. She wasn't saying words, just screaming over and over like she was being stabbed or tortured. The sound hit me so hard I physically jumped. And then I ran. I burst out the door, started my snowmobile as fast as I could, and took off without even looking back. I never saw that cabin again. After that, I was a complete mess, so shaken that I honestly don't remember much of the rest of the journey. At some point, I reached the actual cabin and managed to get through using the emergency radio. They had to send a helicopter to reach Randy. By the time they got to him, he was in terrible shape, severely hypothermic, his leg badly damaged, but he was still alive, still conscious. Those were the worst few hours of my life. To this day, I struggle to piece together the exact sequence of events. Randy survived, but the experience changed him. It was so traumatic that he swore off winter navigation completely, or at least for as long as we were together. I told as many people as I could about that cabin and that scream. They said they would send someone out there as soon as conditions made it possible, and I made sure to follow up. A few days later, they told me they had sent a team out to search the area, but they couldn't find anything. No cabin, no structure, nothing that matched what I described. The guy I spoke to even suggested that I might have hallucinated the whole thing. I lost it on him. That was the end of that conversation. Randy and I broke up about a year later. It had nothing to do with this, but still, I think about that day all the time, because there are really only 3 ways to explain what happened, and none of them are good. The first is that none of it was real, that I hallucinated everything: the cabin, the warmth, the notebook, the scream, that I was cold, terrified, and not thinking clearly, and my brain created a detailed 10-minute experience inside a place that didn't even exist. I can't completely rule that out. The second possibility is that it was all real, that someone was down there, someone who needed help, and I left them trapped under that floor, probably to die. Maybe the troopers couldn't find the place, or maybe they didn't look hard enough. And whatever happened to that person, I don't even want to imagine it. The third possibility is the worst one, that it was a trap, that the smoke and the light were meant to lure someone in, that whoever owned that notebook had been tracking people through that area for a long time, watching them, studying them, waiting for the right moment, and I had walked straight into it. Or worse, maybe it had already worked. Maybe that scream I heard wasn't happening in that moment. Maybe it was someone who had come before me, someone who wasn't lucky enough to escape. And if I had gotten there just a little earlier, that might have been me under those floorboards. I honestly don't know what to believe, and I'm not sure I ever will. When I was a junior in high school, there was this girl I couldn't stop thinking about. Her name was Sienna Rollins. There was something about her, this quiet, almost magnetic presence that's hard to put into words, but I'll try. Yeah, she was really pretty, that was obvious, but it went beyond that. There was this sense of mystery around her, something deeper that you don't usually associate with just a pretty girl. She wasn't popular. In fact, I got to feeling most people, guys and girls, were more intimidated by her than anything else. She wasn't warm. She didn't smile much. Most people just labeled her as weird. I didn't see her that way. To me, her uniqueness was captivating. Whenever we accidentally made eye contact, it would completely freeze me. It felt like stepping into a cold room unexpectedly. Your whole body just reacts before you can think. Honestly, she reminded me of snow, the way a light snowfall can quiet everything around you, even your own thoughts. That's what being around her felt like. And the weirdest part, it felt like no one else noticed. People just saw a quiet girl who kept to herself and barely spoke, but I was always curious, desperate even, to know what was going on in her head. I was reading a lot of young adult fantasy novels back then, so that probably played a role in how I saw her. I was also writing a lot at the time. I even named one of the main characters in a story I was working on, Sienna. You could say I was a little obsessed, but to be fair, I also just liked the name. Anyway, one day I was walking up the stairs at school with my friend George, talking about that exact story. He asked me what I'd named the characters, so I started listing them off. And of course, because timing like this always happens, the moment I said the name Sienna, who turns the corner? The real Sienna. She was walking with one of her friends. As she passed me, she gave this slight smirk, the closest thing to a smile I'd ever seen from her, and said something like, "Yeah, because you love me," or something along those lines. I was instantly embarrassed. George started laughing, which only made it worse. She was already walking past me, clearly not interested in sticking around, and I could feel the moment slipping away. I don't know what came over me, but right then and there, I asked her out. That actually made her stop. She turned and gave me one of those cold, piercing stares she was known for. She didn't even need to say anything. Her eyes said it all. "How dare you even ask me that?" But then she surprised me. She said yes, just like that. She gave me her number, told me to text her, and then walked away before I could even respond. I was completely shocked. But somehow, that's how I ended up going on a hike with the girl I had been obsessing over for months. The hike wasn't even my idea, by the way. None of it was. She planned the entire thing. And the way she went about it, I got the strange feeling that I didn't really have a say, like I was just going along with whatever she decided. And honestly, I was fine with that. So, fast forward to the weekend. Sienna is driving us out to this trail she picked. I had never been there before, and as far as I knew, neither had anyone I knew. The drive was about 45 minutes, but it felt like 10 because my mind was racing the entire time. She had her window down, music playing from her phone, stuff I didn't recognize, which somehow fit her perfectly. We pulled into this small gravel parking lot at the base of the trail. There were maybe 2 other cars there. Without hesitating, Sienna got out and started walking. I followed. For the first 20 minutes or so, everything was actually really nice. She was more talkative than I had ever seen her, which, to be fair, still wasn't very talkative, but for her, it was a lot. She asked about the story I was writing, which was honestly kind of embarrassing, but I gave her a rough explanation while parking lot. Eventually, we reached a fork in the trail. I asked her which way we should go. She pointed to the left without even hesitating. I asked if she'd been here before. She said no. That struck me as a little odd, especially given how confident she seemed, but I didn't question it. The left path was noticeably less maintained, overgrown, uneven. I started to get the feeling we might be going the wrong way, but I kept it to myself. I must have been too deep in my own thoughts because at one point I realized I couldn't hear her footsteps behind me anymore. The trail had gotten so narrow that we were walking single file, and she had motioned for me to go ahead, so I was leading. But when I turned around, she was gone. The trail behind me was completely empty. I called out her name. No response. Confused, I started walking back the way we came. I made it all the way back to the fork. She wasn't there either. At first, I told myself she had probably stepped off the trail for a minute, maybe to use the bathroom or something, and didn't want me to notice. That seemed like a reasonable explanation. But the more I looked around, the less sense it made. There was nowhere for her to go. No side path, no break in the trees. She was just gone. So I decided to try the right fork instead. To my surprise, that path was even more overgrown. The further I walked, the less it felt like a real trail and more like I was just pushing through the woods. I kept calling her name over and over, feeling more ridiculous with each attempt, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't imagine she had just abandoned me. so I kept telling myself it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Then I heard it, a branch snapping somewhere off to my left, deeper in the trees. I turned toward the sound, and I saw movement, something shifting behind one of the thicker trees, and immediately I thought I knew what was happening. It was Sienna, messing with me. Honestly, it would have been completely in character for her, so I decided to flip it on her, surprise her before she could surprise me. I moved slowly, quietly, trying not to make any noise as I approached the tree, and at the last second I jumped out, yelling. But the moment I did, I realized it wasn't her. It was a man. I froze. I was suddenly just inches away from this tall, middle-aged guy who didn't look startled at all. If anything, he looked calm, too calm. Instinctively, I took a few steps back. He just stared at me. Before he could say anything, I blurted out something like, "I'm just looking for my friend," which, looking back, was completely pointless. He didn't care. He started walking toward me. That's when I turned and started heading back toward the trail, trying to stay calm, trying not to run. But then I heard something else, another sound, this time from my right. I looked over and saw another person moving through the trees. This second guy wasn't even hiding. He was just standing there in the open, watching me. And he was holding something in his hand. It looked like a thick tree branch. That's when I ran. I didn't think, I just ran. The second guy was between me and the trail, so I veered off into the woods, moving blindly, hoping I'd somehow find my way back. The moment I started running, they both started chasing me. No more hiding, no more quiet movement. They were coming after me. I ran as fast as I could, but the woods were dense, the ground uneven. It was hard to move quickly. Then suddenly, something grabbed my ankle. I went down hard. It was the first guy. He had caught up to me and was trying to pin me to the ground. I screamed, I kicked, I fought as hard as I could, and somehow, by pure luck, I managed to break free. I scrambled to my feet and ran again. At some point, I realized my mouth was full of blood. I don't even remember how I got hurt. I don't think they followed me after that, but I didn't stop to check. I just kept running. Eventually, I found the trail again, and I kept running, all the way back to the parking lot. Sienna's car was still there, but the other two cars were gone. Sienna wasn't anywhere in sight, and that's when a new kind of fear hit me. I started thinking, what if those guys had gotten her? What if she was out there somewhere, in danger? I didn't know what to do. I must have called her phone 10 times. No answer. I was just about to call the police when my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. She asked where I had gone. I started typing back, trying to explain everything, when I looked up and saw her walking out of the tree line, completely calm, like nothing had happened. I yelled at her to hurry, trying to explain what had just happened to me, but she didn't seem concerned, not even a little. I told her I wasn't joking, that I was serious, but she just looked irritated. Still, we got into the car and started driving. I told her everything, every detail, and she still didn't seem affected. That's when I asked her where she had gone. She said she thought I had gone ahead without her and that she had been trying to catch up the whole time. I knew that was a lie. I had walked all the way back to the fork. There was no way I could have missed her. And that's when it hit me, the thought I didn't want to think. What if she had something to do with it? I didn't know what that something could even be, but the idea stuck. The drive back was the most tense 45 minutes of my life. I kept glancing over at her, wondering how someone who seemed so calm, so quiet, so normal, could be capable of something that cold. And honestly, the answer was probably yes. She dropped me off at my house, we said goodbye, and that was it. I was alone again, still shaken, still trying to process everything that had just happened. What I couldn't get out of my head was the timing. Within minutes of Sienna disappearing, those two men appeared in the exact stretch of woods she had led me into, on the trail she chose, at the fork she decided on, and with me walking ahead, put exactly where I was most vulnerable. It felt planned, like I had been led there. And then, after everything, she just reappeared, perfectly fine, asking where I had gone. We never hung out again after that. I never asked her to. And if I wasn't reaching out to her, there was absolutely no chance she was going to reach out to me. I've told this story to maybe 4 or 5 friends over the years, and every single one of them says the same thing, that she set me up, that she knew that trail, that she knew those people. I've thought about that more times than I can count, but I just don't understand why anyone would do something like that. I have no idea where Sienna is now. She's not on social media. I don't know where she went to college. It's like she just disappeared. And honestly, part of me thinks she was never really who I thought she was in the first place.